Well, yes, Lord.
I think one of the main things that I want to speak about, and this has been a big struggle of mine, is because when I came into Islam, as I explained before, I immediately noticed that the hadith was very questionable. The way that Muhammad is painted out in the hadith is very questionable. And so I immediately went to the Quran only perspective. And I think because I've spent so much time convincing myself of this Quran only perspective, I think that is what is holding me back. Now, if you could show me your reasons why you believe that the Quran only perspective is completely unreliable, cannot be the viewpoint from the perspective of the Quran, then I have no other option but to leave Islam, because I cannot follow an Islam that needs the hadith, that needs the version of the Muhammad that they put forward.
Number one, you're aware that the Quran does say that it is a book that explains all things in detail, right?
Yes.
So you're aware that I don't need to go through those verses like chapter 6, verse 114, chapter 10, verse 37, chapter 12, verse 111, right?
Yeah,
chapter 1, verse 3. So you got that. We've established that. The Quran claiming that explains all things in detail, meaning that the Quran is supposed to give you a complete exposition, fully detailed explanation of its passages. So everything in the book is supposed to be explained in detail. That's what the Quran claims. But then it contradicts itself.
Yes, of course. But if you want to go through anyway, because God willing, I'll show other Muslim friends of mine this video because it might help them also.
Okay. And thus do we explain the ayat in detail. Chapter 6, verse 55. This is chapter 6, verse 97, 98. We've explained in detail our ayat. That's the word for verses. Near the end of the verse, for time. Indeed, we have explained in detail our revelations. While it is he who has sent down unto you the book, explained in detail, that's 6:114. Certainly we have brought to them a book which we have explained in detail with knowledge. So this book is explained in detail with knowledge. Chapter 10, verse 37. Straightforward. And this Quran is not such as could ever be produced by other than Allah, but it is a confirmation which was before it, the Torah, the Injil, and a full explanation of the book. Full explanation. Chapter 12, verse 111. It is not a forward statement, but a confirmation of Allah's existing books and a detailed explanation of everything. Detailed explanation of everything. That's chapter 12, verse 111. That means everything in the book is detailed fully, completely. Chapter 41, verse 3. A book whereof the verses are explained in detail. So the verses are explained in detail. A Quran in Arabic for people who know. Now here's Rashad Khalifa's translation. These are the verses that Rashad Khalifa and Quraniyun, Quran only Muslims, use. A scripture whose verses provide the complete details in an Arabic Quran for people who know. So we've established that, right? The most basic problem you have is, how do you even know what the Quran is? How do you know how many chapters compose the Quran? How do you know how many verses make up each chapter? And how do you know when the Quran was compiled? From the Quran alone. That's just the basic problem you have. Just beginning with the Quran itself. How do you justify the Quran? In other words, for this to make sense, you have to already know what the Quran is, how many chapters does it consist of, and how many verses make up each chapter. So right there, the Quran implodes, because you cannot even justify the Quran from the Quran. Tell me what the Quran is, how many chapters, and when. Now, from the Quran alone, answer those questions.
Yeah, well, this is one of the issues, because I remember when I first came into Islam, I asked if you were to put a person on an island who had never seen or known of Islam before and just give them the Quran by itself, what would they come up with? Yeah. And the more and more you think about it, you just think, well, just very confused, I think, is what they'd end up being, because there's not much to understand by just using the book alone, without the traditions, the culture, the hadith, everything that comes from it. But then my question is, because I don't know much about the Bible, am I going to get the same problem with the Bible?
No.
Or does that explain?
No, because the Bible doesn't make the same claim for itself that the Quran does.
Yeah. Okay.
See, you're comparing apples and pineapples. The Bible does not make this claim for itself. In fact, the Bible presupposes that there's going to be a community that have been entrusted with these texts to expound them. So we don't make the same claim. The Bible does not make the same claim. In fact, apart from the Bible being inspired, it is a collection of books written by different people over a 1,500-year period. So when we compare the Bible and the Quran, it's an unfair comparison. The Quran supposedly comes through one man. So if you want to compare the scriptures of the Christians with the Quran, you have to compare a book of the Bible with the Quran, not the books with one book. You understand my point? In other words, you take Luke and compare it with the Quran, author by author or book by book, not a collection of books, in comparison to one book that supposedly came through one man. And even that information depends on sources that come over 100 years after the reported death of that man. Even his death is based on these later sources. Because you can't tell me Muhammad was born in 570 AD. How do you know that? Well, you have to appeal to these sources. How do you know when Muhammad died and where? Well, you have to appeal to these sources. Well, that's the problem, right? Whereas in the collection of the books we call the New Testament, this is not my opinion. Even a Bart Ehrman, who's a skeptic, as an historian, he will tell you that the only documents we have from the first century are the books of the New Testament. And he will tell you, Paul's letters can be situated historically because he gives you enough statements internally to situate the historical context. And Luke in Acts mentions certain rulers that extra biblical archaeological discoveries have confirmed. So we have books that mention events, rulers, places, individuals that can corroborate its historical setting. The Quran doesn't have any of that. Why do you think now you have revisionist scholars that say, well, the Quran seems to be actually situated in Petra?
Yes.
Dan Gibson and Jay Smith champions those views because the Quran has no context. It does not tell you. In fact, some of the references to its geography do not sit well or fit well with Mecca or Medina. So here it is. The first problem you have as a Quran-only Muslim, situate the Quran for me. Tell me when, where, and how, just from the Quran. You can't do that, right? Just to give you some problems with the Quran-only position and try to answer this. This is chapter 111 of the Quran. Now remember, the Quran says it's fully detailed. It's going to explain everything in the book, right? The power of Abu Lahab will perish, and he will perish. Who's Abu Lahab?
I'm not too sure.
Exactly. So why is he so important that there's an entire chapter mentioned cursing him and his wife to hell? What the hell did he do, pun intended, to get Allah so upset that he devotes an entire chapter to this man? Abu Lahab means father of the flames. That's a derogatory term. We don't even know his name because Abu Lahab means father of the flames. That's not his name. That's the author of the Quran making fun of him, that you are the father of flames, the owner of the flames, because you're going to hell.
Yeah, this is very strange. Where is this in the
chapter 111 of your Quran? Surah Al-Lahab. Who is he?
Yeah, not a clue.
The Muslims who then go to these later sources cannot simply choose and pick what they like and ignore the statements in the same corpus that show Muhammad was a pedophile, a murderer, evil, wicked. You can't do that.
No.
See, this is the dilemma for the Muslim, not for me. I don't care about Muhammad. I don't care about Islamic tradition. But since I'm dealing with Muslims, I'm going to use their sources against them. But when they start questioning their sources, I go, now you buried the Quran. Now you have no justification for the Quran. You cannot justify the Quran. You cannot tell me the historical context of the Quran, because you can't just take those hadiths that agree with your assumption of what Muhammad was and what he can be like, because that's circular. No, we know Muhammad is a prophet of mercy. Well, how do you know that? Well, because the Quran tells you. Well, how do you know the Quran is talking about that Muhammad? Because the name Muhammad only appears 4 times. So every time it mentions the prophet, how do you know it's in Muhammad? Well, we go to the hadiths. Yeah, but these hadiths incriminate him. It shows he's a murderer, a pedophile, whoremonger, immoral. Oh, no, those statements were lies. So your Muslim community decided to make up statements to make their prophet look like a devil. But you assume he wasn't the way these hadiths depict him because you've been duped into thinking he must be merciful. And then you reject these statements, but these are the same hadiths, same corpus you're dependent on to even tell me that Muhammad was a prophet and he was born this time and he did these things. That's circular. You can't get away with it.